Hi, thanks so much for inviting me to speak today. So I'm going to speak about three things in a fairly short time. One is this study that Mark and I did about a year and a half ago, and then two case studies of activities that occurred in Mansfield, one with the elementary school and the second with the Region 19 high school. So about 2 years ago, I was at a school board meeting for Region 19 for the high school, and was listening to a discussion about putting solar onto the considerable roof of the high school, which is called E.O. Smith. And I was certainly picking up that there was a lot of interest from the superintendent, from the chair of the school board, but the facilities director said, no, solar on schools is really a big problem. You can't get the snow off the roof. They tend to short circuit. There are all sorts of problems. And I think I need to put the superintendent and the chair of the school board in touch with people who have put solar on schools and get a different perspective. And so I decided to put together a list of, let's see whether this works, a list of schools in Connecticut at that time that had solar on them, put contact information, other information, and then make it available. So I looked at I used a database from the Green Bank and a database from something called the Solar Foundation, which is a national organization. And it was probably out of date the day I put it together, the day that we put it together, and it's certainly out of date now. But this is what we found, that at that time, mid-2018, there were approximately 100 schools in Connecticut with 60 kilowatts or more solar on them. And that was out of almost 1,200 schools, public schools in Connecticut. So although 100 schools is not bad, it's actually a pretty low percentage, 8%. So we had an artificial cutoff of 60 kilowatts just because there are lots and lots of schools with 3 kilowatts, 5 kilowatts, 10 kilowatts. So for those of you who are not completely in tune with what 60 kilowatts is, a typical home might have 6 kilowatts of solar panels on it. And so this would be about 10 homes worth of solar. So I put this together so that sometimes schools, name of schools, name of town, the date it was put on, the size of the system, and then any other information I could gather fairly easily, articles, other information. I also found myself fascinated with the satellite photographs from Google Maps. And I think it's actually kind of useful to see what does a 100 kilowatt system look like? What does a 2,000 kilowatt system look like? And so this is still available, but again, it is out of date. In the study, we decided to put in a little bit of advice on how to go forward. Although there are other ways to do this, talking to the Green Bank is certainly a good way to get going. They know a lot about the financing of solar projects. They have contact with contractors. Oops. They have contact with contractors, so it's a good place to start. Nearby schools, talking to other administrators and school board members, clean energy activists, and using the solar school study that I put together, although you can also go to the Solar Foundation study to get contact information. But I think that talking to other school districts is important. I think that talking to solar contractors is a good thing to do. Don't fall in love with any of them. Try to get a referral. But in any kind of building project, contractors know things that nobody else knows, and they're a good source of information. And finally, in our little bit of advice, it was don't forget about energy efficiency. You don't want to oversize a system when you could get by with a lot less by doing some minimal or even better, a lot of energy efficiency measures. So that's the study. Now on to Mansfield. So Mansfield, more than 6 years ago, started the process of trying to figure out what the heck are we going to do with our 3 old schools that were not in very good condition at the same time that our school populations were declining. And a lot of what happened in Mansfield, I'd love to talk about. It's interesting, but it's not really relevant to the topic of zero energy. It was a very difficult discussion in town. It failed at first, 6 years ago or so, and then was started up again about 2 years ago. And there was just a lot of discussion about the main issue was both on a practical level and on an emotional level about how do we consolidate 3 schools into one, although actually the first question was, what should we do? Should we renovate 3 schools, renovate 2 schools, build 1 new school, build 2 new schools, build 1 new school, and renovate 1 new school? Everything was looked at. And the sustainability issues were not at the forefront, they were certainly present. In the end, the solution was build 1 new school. It was contentious. There was a referendum about it, and it didn't get passed on its own. I have this little pin on it. It says it says yes, but it was part of a campaign. There were probably a dozen of us in town who came together and said, this is really important for all sorts of reasons. I would have been totally in favor of this for any, just for the educational and fiscal reasons. But the opportunity to make this into a net zero building certainly animated or informed my activities. I want to mention that 2 of the people who are so important to making this happen are here with us today. I didn't know they were going to be here. And I'd like them to stand up just for a second. I know they don't want to, but I'd like them to stand up because you should talk to them at the meeting. So it's Randy Wallenkonis, who is the chair of the building committee, and Kathy Ward, who is the chair of the Board of Education. So my advocacy and the advocacy of other people to make this into a net zero building wouldn't have happened without them, plus the superintendent. They were certainly already focused on making it into a zero energy building, but I think that they needed a little more information about the feasibility of net zero, both on a practical, on a technological basis and on a financial basis. And as I mentioned earlier when I got up and made a short comment, the level of enthusiasm from the Office of Administrative Services and the school section within that was not high. And one of the things that makes us, I think, all very happy about going to the work of working for net zero is that I think we moved the ball. Particularly Randy and Kathy and Kelly Lyman, the superintendent, in speaking with that office, that they went from, we don't want to do this, to, this is a pretty good idea. We're kind of proud of this. And so anyways, that's Mansfield. And then I'm going to end on E.O. Smith. So E.O. Smith is a regional high school that serves 3 towns. And about 6 years ago, I showed up at a school board meeting for Region 19 and said, where's the solar? And I got a very polite, maybe even friendly reception, but I was told the roof has some time left and time to come back in 2 or 3 years. I came back in 2 or 3 years and was told, we don't really want to do this yet, come back in 2 or 3 years. 2 or 3 years later, we had a new superintendent. The roof had continued to deteriorate, and the new superintendent had taken the bull by the horns and looked at what the options were, and we had a referendum in May of 2019. It passed overwhelmingly to put on a new roof with more insulation. to make it solar ready. And then it passed, the referendum passed overwhelmingly with a ridiculously small number of votes, all told. I'll just throw in a little wrinkle in all of this, that the state then told the Region 19 that no, solar ready wasn't good enough. If they were going to give us all this money, you had to put the solar on right away. And that caused a big scramble, and in December we had a second referendum just for the solar. That also passed overwhelmingly, but interestingly with more voters. So I just wanted to give a few takeaways from this. One was, it's important to know what's going on in your town. Probably all of the people who are here actually do. But if you don't insert sustainability, renewable energy, zero energy into the discussion early on, it's not going to happen. If you find out that there's going to be a referendum or they've hired an architect already to design the school, it's too late, almost certainly. Secondly, the building's conditions, or a building's condition or uncertain future can really, can delay things, and sometimes legitimately. One solution can be solar canopies, which Scott will be talking about. Another is virtual net metering, where a town builds or has built a large solar array somewhere in town or elsewhere in the utilities territory, and then the output is credited to municipal accounts. And in that way, you don't have to know what the future of the building is going to be. You don't have to wait for a new roof. Third, learn something about the solar options, the financing, the benefits, the regulatory atmosphere, where you can get help. Because I think it's important. The school officials, in my experience, are really interested in this, but they have to think about so many other things: staffing, financing, all sorts of stuff. They're not that knowledgeable necessarily, and so one of the things that we as advocates can do is to provide that knowledge benefit. And finally, sometimes you're making your case to school officials who are very receptive, in which case just keep on working and consider yourself very lucky. Sometimes town officials are not that receptive, and I think that the answer is keep working, and some people's minds can be changed, mostly by knowledge, mostly by more information. And then sometimes by change of personnel. In both the case of E.O. Smith and Mansfield, it took new superintendents to actually get the job done. I don't know whether that was coincidental or not. Anyways, thank you very much.
Yeah. Is virtual net metering available right now?
I think that the program is probably reached its max. It has been capped out, but I don't know that for sure. I know that in the last legislative session, it was increased by a disappointing level. I think it was just 10 million, 20?
25 a year.
$25 million a year.
$25 million or megawatts?
Oh, megawatts, right, megawatts.
Okay.
And so I don't know whether it's been capped out.
So is it in a regulatory docket right now, or waiting for
It hasn't been released yet. I think
Actually, we're putting two projects together for South Windsor and other towns. So what we've been told by our contractor is there's no more opportunity to start new projects based on what's been released so far. But that's
It's a short session coming up in the next week. I think we can advocate with the Energy and Technology Committee. They have to make that bucket a lot bigger, and we could, constantly. I know a lot of us are trying to get them to open it up.
Yeah. So the thing that is when we talk about being capped out was a 6 megawatt pilot passed several years ago. I think 4 for Eversource, 2 for UI. That may be close to being capped out. SB 9 last year passed 25 megawatts a year for 6 years, so a total of 150. And it went through PURA. I think DEEP recently issued some regulatory guidelines. I don't think it's actually implemented, but it's certainly not capped out yet. But, so that's still coming.
And we have also community solar and the tariff-based system. Is that replacing virtual meter? What's going on there?
I think that there's totally separate programs, and the shared solar regulations are still in the midst of being reviewed and, reviewed, and they should be coming out soon. But that's in terms of state government soon. So, anyways, thank you very much.